See what happens. It says preparing. There you go, we're live. Hello, beautiful souls. This is my first YouTube live. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing to my channel.
Hello, beautiful souls.
Oh,
this is my first YouTube live.
Shush.
Thank you for being here.
Stop that. Right. Inevitably, things are going to go funky. Anyway, beautiful. So, this is my dear friend, Jenny Abdelnour. Abdelnour, did I say that correctly, Jenny?
You said it beautifully. Yeah.
Coming live from New Zealand. I'm Tara Love Perry. I am live in Brighton, UK. And Jenny and I have been connecting now for a couple of months via the Divine Feminine Roundtables. And we were on a live conversation that happened with some sisters maybe a week or so ago that went live out in South Africa. And we started talking about grief. And we thought that it was so important, this understanding of what grief is, how to grieve, what we're grieving about, and allowing it to come through. We thought that was so important. And Jenny and I really connected on this so deeply that we want to share it with you today. So before we get into that, I'm just going to light this candle for the collective healing and as a representation of fire and spirit and transformation. And Jenny, I'd love to invite you to share how you're feeling today, where you're at with this grief topic, and anything you'd like to do to set the space.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be at the table in the sanctuary of grief, really in that space, and opening to what is and what will be within that space. I often find, like, as we open that space, and even the word grief can often cause such a contraction in the physical body, the emotional body. And I just want to hold that this space is so open, so expanded, so welcoming and allowing for all the grief that wishes to be expressed through us and our beautiful female bodies tonight, today. And really feeling the multi-dimensional link that grief is. It is the part that accesses parts of us through all dimensions, all timelines, all spaces. And in this physical reality, it is the place where so many people live in a grief avoidance state, which narrows the bandwidth of life and the lived experience. So just really honoring the portal, the opening, the expansion that grief is, and allowing her, allowing him, allowing the we of that space to speak through us today.
Thank you, Jenny. Can you share with people what you do and how you come, like what your expertise is, how you come to be able to speak about this with such clarity?
Thank you. Most of my work, all of my work is involving the human body. So from a science background of physical therapy, working in the UK, through many, many different modalities, I find my way to New Zealand through the intelligence of what the species of horse has taught me, the elegance and the etiquette of understanding pure energy through the intelligence of the horse wisdom, the horse medicine, and my own connection with my own healing journey. So it's had me in places from, as many of us, our grief journey, our healing journey takes us into all the wet spots. I always call it the wet spots. It's the spots where the heart leaks through our eyes in whatever form it presents. So that has been from working in intensive care units in hospitals with people at very end of stage life experience, to being placed at the scene of many road traffic accidents where I have been one that assists people to pass over, to many grief spaces.
I think everybody can relate to that. The road traffic accident, I immediately feel it. I think everyone has, you pick it up there, don't you, a lot?
Yeah.
Like you're moving through an energy of grief or shock in that moment. Thank you, Jenny. And so I have an experience in working with grief in terms of ceremony, because as you guys all know, I'm a soul reader. And so I read energies, and I discovered it, oh God, I don't even know how many years ago now. Probably around 7 or 8 years ago. Because I was in such need of collective grief, I needed to grieve. And I realized that that crying on my own wasn't healing. And also that my grief didn't always come in tears. And I've had experiences in my life, and I feel like I'm going to share about this today around my womb and babies and children and loss, where I didn't even know I was in grief. And I think this happens to a lot of people because the tears weren't coming. And so how to identify that? So I want to share a little bit about that before, to begin with here. And so because I was in such a need for someone to hold space for me while I could really access what I was feeling and cleanse it through my body, which is what we need to do as human beings. And I think for women, we can easily identify that because we have cycles and we bleed every month, or, maybe not every month for some of us, but certainly we have that regular cycle. We shed skin cells, our cells renew. We have a renewal process. We do have tears a lot often as women as our way of cleansing and to aerate our feelings and to be able to bring them out to the surface. That's all part of our cleansing and our healing. And I think that for men, it's harder to identify. And from my understanding in many cultures across the world, a way that men would release their grief would be to bleed, to bloodlet, to give some kind of cut, to give some kind of offering, in the way that us women, we have a bloodlet every month. And we have that emotional time where we can access our feelings and release them. But for men, it was harder. So they would have a ritualistic, and I'd love to know more about this if you have any information about this, because I've got very little knowledge on this. It's just something I picked up, that men would actually cut themselves. And obviously we see the history of men going into battle and fighting and bleeding, and letting that grief out, whether it comes out in rage, like a fire. We have these symbols of grief in the grief ceremonies that I was doing, to enable people to access the different kinds of grief. So we would have a sacred space. It would be in a circle. We would have the fire in the center. Prayers were done. Herbs were offered to the fire. And we would have these different tools. And one of them would be like water, like you were saying, the wet spot, the weeping. And water can also be really transient and hard to pin down, hard to get clarity. And sometimes water is really shallow and clear, and it's very simple. And other times water is very deep and murky and dark, and there's no oxygen, and it's hard to breathe through that much depth, right? So it's hard to go down into that depth all in one go. It feels like a deep dive where you have to go a bit at a time, and it can be incredibly scary to do that on your own. So then there's also the metal of grief, like a knife, like a sword that cuts, and it's steely and it's hard, and it can be stabbing kind of a grief, or that steely coldness of grief. And I feel like that's the kind of grief that men brought to battle often. That's the way that the masculine has shown grief often. And it doesn't look like grief. And that's hard to, I think that's quite hard for it not to be recognized as a masculine, as a man, that it goes unrecognized because we don't recognize the different kinds of grief. And then there's the stone cold rock of grief. Like you were saying, you said, what did you say earlier? Like about the no smile, Jenny, just before we came on.
Yeah, absolute expressionless, no expression, impenetrable, immovable grief.
Right?
Yeah.
Where you can't get through. And that person has become so, it's like a tombstone of grief, isn't it? So rigid that you can't access any kind of feeling. And that is incredibly hard, like literally hard, but also emotionally hard for anyone who's experiencing that kind of grief. And again, being unrecognized just because we're used to grief being in the form of tears. And then there's I would often have like feathers to represent the ghost, the spirit, where it's almost so out of body, where especially where there's a loss of love through shock, and we just go out of our bodies and we're not even connected to our bodies anymore. Have you experienced that, Jenny, or seen that, where people are almost hovering above themselves? And it's almost like we think they're in complete denial, but they just can't access the physical realm. That it's almost like they want to go to the spirit world with the person or people that they have lost. And it's like they'd almost rather be there. And again, that's really hard for those people because then they can't relate to anybody. You know, it's hard to, yeah. I mean, I lived, I think, the first part of my life like that, to be honest. Very out of my body, disconnected from my feelings. So I really understand how that is. And it can seem like everything's fine. Like living in the higher frequencies, like it's all good, you know, love and light, spiritual understanding, there is no death, or, you know, whatever that, you know, or they're in God's hands or with the angels, but not really accessing the human emotion. So these are just a few of the aspects of grief. And I speak about these, just because you can, you know, we can kind of gravitate to something like you might intuitively want to light a candle, or you might intuitively be just needing to be in water to facilitate your own connection to what you're feeling. So I would go with your own trust on that, your own intuition on that.
I can so relate, Clara, to that sense of existing outside the body of the grief experience. And I feel that so many people on the planet today are in that space of hovering above the experience of life and also the grief that they would need to meet to fully come to life within their own physical space. And you know, that sense for me, when we have an event or an occurrence that is that deep loss of love in the moment, that deep feeling of something is taken away from me, something has gone, something has left, something has disconnected from me, that is experienced as such a deep trauma in the body. What you know, emotionally, what happens is the hypothalamus, which is almost like the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, literally starts squirting the master gland chemicals to hit us with pain relief, to hit us immediately with anesthesia. So we are pain numbed and we are anesthetized to the initial experience. And this for me has been so interesting in my journey, Tara, and how it's related to other people. Grief follows its own timeline. So how that initial master gland delivers the transmission of something so significant has happened here, pay attention. And how over time that shows up in people's embodied experience is incredible. And you know, working with a lot of people in acute grief when they've lost a child or when they've lost a loved one or a pet or whatever, whoever it may be, that deep loss that feels like the whole of the body has been ripped out and taken with that which was lost. Literally, it's that sense of something has aborted in my body in that moment. I will never be the same again. And the body's biochemistry squirts, if you like, a healing balm. Yet that can be years worth of, like you say, the solidification, the calcification, the hardening, because in that space, we are so soft, we are so human, we are so vulnerable. And from that immediate alteration of inner perspective, the world we were living in feels incredibly harsh and hard and moves at a pace which doesn't meet our nervous system exactly where it's at. So that biochemical, hypothalamus-led kind of hospice. It's like an inner hospice. It's like, you know, what we experience there is like the body taking care of the most tender part of us. And in a way, it's an inner soothe. Yet some of us are not used to feeling that intensity and that challenge with just taking care of our own needs. Like in that space, the energy it then takes to make a cup of tea or to go to the bathroom or to put your clothes on in the morning takes everything.
Yes.
Mm.
And yeah, I think you have an exquisite way of communicating that. Thanks so much, Jenny, because I've experienced grief to be where I've been totally numb. Like literally can't feel anything. And it's like being really remote. It's like walking around where the rest of the world is behind glass and I'm outside of that glass looking in and I can't feel or relate to anything. It's really weird, very lonely, isn't it? And the reason, Jenny, you suggested this video title, Lifting the Lid on Grief, because our conversation, whenever it was a week ago, with the roundtable in South Africa, the conversation had gone into the Pandora's box of the world, lifting the lid in the Pandora's box of what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how, you know, that archetype, if you like, of what has been suppressed for so long and it's still existing. Everything that we suppress over a lifetime within ourselves, if we're the Pandora's box, from childhood, from teenagehood, from early adult, or whatever stage we're at, and even going back to the womb, the grief that we experience whilst still gestating in the womb, and the grief that we can bring through or suppressed, unrecognized feelings. Let's say that loss of love and suppressed, unrecognized, unidentified, unvalidated experiences, feelings that are out of harmony, being brought by the soul into the lifetime now. Our own collective soul grief, you know, like lifetimes worth, where you experience a death, you pass through the corridor, you enter a new room, into a new body, into a new life, and that travels with you in your soul. And so also we have the ancestral grief that you were talking about, spanning time and dimensions, how this grief works. Because if we have, let's say my mother had suppressed grief, and her mother had suppressed grief, and her mother had suppressed grief, and that, you know, how far does that go back? That gets actually bred into me on a cellular level, as a cell retains that information, because cells are mostly water and water retains information. We are mostly water, and it's like that. It's in the bones, it's in the DNA, it's in the womb. It gets passed like a baton into the womb. And also then my father, my father's father, my father's father, and again, all the way back. How far does that suppressed grief of the masculine go back? And so all of that is bred from him and my mother into me, as well as my own soul grief. And then we enter into a world, Jenny, where we have every single other human being that's ever been ever, with suppressed emotional disharmony, mental disharmony, physical illness, war, loss, betrayal, you name it. And we enter with, as a little innocent, we come into this field of the world where we pick up, we get a sense of the pain, we get a sense things aren't okay. And I know for me, when I was young, I almost didn't want to put my feet on the ground because I didn't want to associate and connect with the earth and the grief that almost like I would be contaminated and step into the world of trauma if I grounded and landed and put my feet down on the ground. And I know I'm not alone in this. I know loads and loads of people that have this experience. So I'd rather stay out of my body. So we have every single human experiencing their own collective suppression, and then into the world and the sea of that suppression. And how do we deal with it? And right now, because the lid has been on so tight for so long, and what's festered in that space, what's festered in the darkness of the suppression, the tyranny, the manipulation, the lies, the abuse. And really it's all abuse, isn't it? It's absolute abuse of the naive or the ignorant or the innocent on this planet. And that's what the lid right now is lifting off for all of us. And I believe there will be no stone left unturned. There will be no spot on the planet where you don't get affected, because it's a collective cleansing, a collective purging, a collective healing that needs to happen and is happening, whether we like it or not.
I
So
have a huge,
yeah, sorry, go
yeah.
on.
No, I have a huge sense to speak into. It feels like the space of the masculine and feminine. It feels like a meeting space. It feels like the space we would have called the elephant in the room. You know, the space where man, woman, or our inner masculine and feminine has danced on eggshells around the don't disturb the Pandora's box, don't poke the elephant, ignore the elephant in the room. Let's talk and speak and move around it until it has taken up so much physical space in the core of our being, we can no longer connect to our essence. So it is hijacking the very container that is designed to hold the love that we are. And really feeling, you know, this, like you say, with the womb, but also the masculine, and how we both bleed in different ways, in different rituals, in different patterns, for different reasons. How that, just actually feeling that energy coming in. How the feminine depth, the depth of the feminine, the depth to go in, the depth to lose herself, the depth to deep sea dive with no oxygen mask, you know, like to deep sea dive. And the capacity of the masculine as the container to hold her and to hold himself within that. That it's only when the two can actually hold the gift that each brings that we can penetrate to the very core of our grief and to the very core of our love.
That's what it is, isn't it? Yeah. We grieve because we love. And
So
we're not feeling the love. And there's been a distinct lack of love being shown on this planet for a long, long time. And that's the grief right there. You named it. And it does need a container. This is the point. All of us secretly, quietly trying to process this on our own. And we've become so top heavy with our minds and our thinking and our analyzing and our justifying away and our putting our positive affirmations all over the top of everything. It's like just putting concrete slabs. Be positive, be positive, be positive. And I'm just screaming inside, just being like, people, stop being positive. There's shit happening on this planet.
yeah.
There is shit happening inside of you, and it needs your love and attention urgently. You can't put a tombstone over a body and say rest in peace when there is no peace. You know, that soul has to be in peace. The being has to be in peace. You have to be in peace. And the way that we need to do that, my feeling is, well, I know, I mean, it's an ancient practice. It's old cultures, or many cultures still do, and it's collectively grieving. I'm just going to put my headphones in because my plumber's being a bit noisy.
And that collective grieving, like Tara, you've spoken into it so beautifully. Like I'm the same as you. I had to physically create the container I fucking needed for myself.
Yeah.
But I had to offer it to other people, and I had to work it and feel it and cultivate what I needed at the core of my being. And hold that for other people and other people and other people, and hone it and sculpt it and go, Jen, it needs to be way bigger. It needs to be way deeper. And kept going and kept going and kept going.
How do we create that now, Jen? How do we create facilitators? I mean, there's facilitators all around the world that understand about ceremony and grief and circles, men's circles, women's circles, collective circles. Circles, right? Circles is the container, the pot, for something to alchemize in, for a purification. And there needs to be the container, not necessarily male and female, but the masculine and feminine element. And how we used to do it, or how I used to facilitate, was everybody would sit in a circle, the fire in the center, and whoever felt that need to go in and connect to one of those items, like I said, and be able to speak or share their grief. And I would sometimes get my drum out or rattles, and we would encourage them to move it physically through their body, which is really important, because you can't, with that much energy that's needing to come through and release, it needs full expression. And for other people to come in and grieve with that person and share, you know, because for instance, this beautiful man came in and he was sharing his anger. He couldn't connect to grief. All he could feel was anger and rage, the fire. I'm gonna burn the world down, you know, with his fire. He was so angry. And a lot of people get freaked out at anger, especially a big, strong, you know, massive, muscular man. A lot of people are like threatened by that. But this guy, he needed it. Who was going to hold him? Who was going to hold that man? And it took the circle to hold him, and us all to hold him, so he could come in and let his rage out, because he didn't want to, he wasn't angry at anybody. He was angry at himself and the world and the loss, and he needed a safe space to let that out. So how do we hold these spaces for one another, and also for myself, actually? No, I'm going to come back to this. I want to talk about the child, the grieving of the child. But how can people really connect to this and hold space for one another? Because like you rightly said a week ago in that interview, that talk, Jen, the whole world needs to grieve for what's happening, and we have no control, and we need the love to come back. We need the love here. And before we can access the love and the peace, we've got to go through the grief swamp, or we got to go through the fires of the grief, or the swords of grief, or whatever it is. We have to go through that to get our healing. How do we do that?
And I agree. It's like, with what's going on in the world, this desperate scrambling to place somebody's stepping stone of righteousness above somebody else's, this neck up grief avoidance. This avoidance of to be in the unknown, to be in the not knowing, to be in that space in the body, because what is known and what is not met within is what is showing up in the world outside of our bodies. And the invitation, the invocation to meet that within. And, you know, you and I use very similar tools with the breath. We always, you know, we come to the breath. We invite that, the air, the energy of the spirit, that alchemy to meet our water body, to meet the deepest water part of us.
Oxygenate. Bring back to life. Bring back
Bring
from the dead that which has been buried.
Yeah. Oh.
And people are terrified of doing that. They'd rather not dig up old graves, and it's like, we got to.
We've got to dig up all the graves. We've got to dig up the part that is so dormant, that is so already at death's door. You know, it's not that we're afraid of death. We're afraid of meeting the part of us that is so dead already, that is so, you know, beyond resuscitation, unless we fucking choose to go there, to take our own oxygen and our free will to the table of grief within, to bring it right away into the body.
And why is it dead? Because it hasn't been loved.
Yeah. Yes.
There's been no light of love, no light of consciousness, no breath. And breath is unconditional love. That's the lifeline right there.
That's the lifeline.
You know, in love, there is no disharmony anywhere. In real unconditional love, I'm talking, not human conditional love, unconditional love. The love that is, the love that permeates and is all things everywhere. When we have a perception or we have an experience of a lack of that, is when our bodies deteriorate, our spirit deteriorates, our mind deteriorates, our emotions deteriorate. We deteriorate permanently, like not permanently, sorry, you know, all over.
Yeah.
We just do not thrive or survive in the absence of love. Whereas in the presence of love, we are magnanimous, we're magnificent, we expound, we evolve. And it is simply like moving from that space of deep lack of love, lack of light, lack of awareness, lack of presence with what is, and to have to go back and bring the presence, to love oneself enough, or to love the earth enough, or to love the children enough, or to love humanity enough, or to love that we want peace and love on this planet enough to do the warrior brave mission, to retrieve all parts of us that have been left in that darkness unloved. And how can we do that? We need one another. And I hear what you're saying, Jen. I'm so bored of people just banging on righteously about their opinions. Who gives a shit about opinions? How is that going to heal anything with everybody's different righteous opinions? And I'm like, guys, what's real? What's real is what we feel. And what we feel matters. What our feelings inform us of who we are and what our purpose is. And we need to get to that we need to get to that table, right? We need to come to our round tables together, where everyone is at the same table, and it's a low table, so that everyone can access it. And there's no higher head of the table and lower end of the table. We are humanity. We need to be seen. We need to be heard. We need to be empathized with and not judged, like this gentleman that I was talking about in the grief summary. This is in Dubai, and I used to do them in the desert in the evening time, so people could really yell. And it gave people that sense of safety. And it was wonderful, wonderful man expressing his anger, you know, and there was no judgment of like, oh, he's threatening, you know, there was no reason for anyone to get into their victim and make that guy wrong or bad. It was like, I feel really fucking angry too. Let's get angry. Me too. Me too. And we share, and we don't leave any man or woman on their own, thinking that it's just them, because it's not just them. It's not, if you're listening to this, it's not just you. You can bet there's a billion other people who feel like you do. And who's going to be honest enough to be heard, to let that be seen, because we need that. That's healing. And we need to empathize and feel the compassion for ourselves and for one another at this immensely deep, buried grief, buried disharmony that needs to come to light right now.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I always get that feeling, Tara, it's like Mama Earth, she feels us. She feels us in full transparency. There's nothing we can hide from Mama, including the grief. And she's been holding and holding the heaviness of the unspoken and unexpressed grief for humanity for so long. So I just feel like it's a call to stop lying to ourselves, to stop bullshitting, to stop putting the smiles on in the street when we meet each other, to take ourselves to that place where we can feel the depth and the capacity to hold an inordinate amount of grief and love in the same physical body. That we can actually, you know, it's like, if there's anything that's going to bring us together, it's the grief we share. If there's anything, if there is an alchemizing strand of commonality that we all hold, it's our grief.
I think people are terrified of going there because they might never come out. It's
Never.
like going into the underworld. There's a fear of never coming out, but we do.
We do, and we go through it, and it's a fucking sacred altar. It is a sacred altering that occurs when we go into that. And yes, there is no safety net.
I love that.
But there is.
It's like dying to the divine, right?
Oh,
it's like literally just like, okay.
Grief is a surrender.
Transmute.
Oh, yeah, grief is a surrender. Grief is trusting that there is something so vast that has got your back way beyond the safety nets of the human design.
And that's the breath.
Oh,
it's all right there. It's not an imaginary thing. You don't have to imagine the safety net or imagine the divine or imagine God or imagine. It's right here. That umbilical to the divine is right there in that breath, constantly, all the time, no matter what. So that's how to not get lost. So, I mean, I'm just going to encourage people, create your circles. Create your circles. If, like Jen and I, you're like, you recognize your own grief and you're like, I can't hold it in anymore. Don't wait till you get to that level, right? Connect, put a call out, yes. And not that you have to do it. You set the space, you get people to help you set the space. You don't do it alone. And when you're there, you let go. You're in it. It can facilitate itself when you call in the right, you know, anchoring. Maybe perhaps, Jen, like we could, I don't know. I just thought about this right now, maybe like guidelines for a grief ceremony or a circle, because that's quite a large issue actually to, maybe we can talk about that today, or maybe we can actually come back and discuss that another day, actually how to set up a grief ceremony or a grief circle and a space to transmute and come back to that. Okay, come up for air, come up for lightness, and then for it to be a regular thing too, because you don't just grieve once and it's done. There are layers and layers, and one day it might feel like a rock, another day it might feel like a sword, another day it might feel like a feather, you know. So there's different layers and aspects to communicate through that. Maybe we could talk about that another time, Jen, and come back in and share that with people.
That's great. Yeah.
But you know, in the meantime, connect to your own. How do you connect? You breathe and you feel, and you basically, like you said, Jen, stop lying to yourself, open your lid, and even just start communicating, sharing with others. And I really do want to talk about the children, Jen.
Yeah.
Okay, where to start on this one? I'll share where I've been actually for the last 2 weeks, put this in a little bit of context, is I've had this incredible opportunity, which feels like a real privilege, something I've never had before, which is to be able to communicate with a man, masculine, who and connect and share about our sexual wounding, the abuse of the inner child, and how that has impacted us in how we relate and subconsciously manipulate without realizing, to gain power over or to be a victim and be taken over by somebody else's power, and how we can kind of move in and out of those spaces without even realizing, in the context of a relationship, whether that's a relationship that's a one-night relationship or whether that's a longer, you know, a marriage, a connection, but that how we as the human beings have had our sexuality distorted because the inner child was not protected. The child was not. Where have been the parameters of safe and sacred sex in this world? Where have they been? There's been use, abuse, misuse of sexuality and power for the longest time. And it's the hijacking of the innocence to gain power over. Now, this is a deep and it can be very dark subject. We touched on it in one of our other UK Goddess roundtables. I'm not wanting to go that deep today, but just to say that in the last 2 weeks, my body has been in cleansing. I've never bled for 2 weeks, and I've been bleeding for 2 weeks in that cleansing of my womb as I've been going through this healing. And I've experienced a huge amount of fire and burning in my womb space. And I've needed to navigate and be completely open and be completely vulnerable and sharing with my partner about, and really giving each other space to speak as well, and not making it his fault or him making it my fault or projecting our fears onto one another. That's been a really interesting territory, to not do that, but just to hold unconditional loving space and hear and see and empathize and connect and stay connected in that very vulnerable space and that vulnerable discussion. And what I was also grieving, which I didn't realize from my mind, but my body was grieving. She was weeping for the loss of a baby. It's not something I mean, I'm going to share this now. It's not something I'm proud of. It needed to happen at the time. I'm not going to say why, but I had an abortion. And I did it at home in a bath, in a huge amount of pain. I wanted to do it consciously because I birthed consciously. So I was like, I'm going to do this as consciously as I can. And it was pretty horrific. It was really awful, actually. And then a few years later, I actually then miscarried, and it felt like the same soul of the child. I mean, I knew it was. I was with her spirit for those years after the abortion. She stayed with me, and then I miscarried, and then her spirit was gone, and she was cleansed, if you like. She was freed from me. And I didn't realize that I was still grieving about that until a few nights ago, feeling into my womb, like putting my attention into my womb, listening, what is happening here? And she was like, I'm grieving that loss. That was years and years and years ago, you know? And it was like, literally aspects of my inner feminine, inner body, inner womb had held that grief in the materials of my womb lining. And then it had to be released physically from my body. So we might think, right, grief is just an emotion, and it's not. It gets embedded deep in the body. It can calcify, it can harden the arteries, the blood, you know, all aspects of ourselves. And as I'm feeling into this loss of child, loss of children, I have a very kind of universal mother feeling about myself, where, you know, everybody's children are my children. And, you know, I think a lot of us women do, maybe fathers too. There's that very powerful, almost overcoming need to protect the children from the suffering anymore. And knowing what most of us on this planet have been through in terms of the use and abuse and misuse of a sexual energy as a young person or as a child, and knowing how long that's been going on the planet, and that it's going on right under our noses in that Pandora's box that the lid is coming off of. And Jen and I know we both feel, and many others in our community are very aware that this lid has been lifted, and that this truth of the abuse is coming to light for the whole planet. And that's going to be, it's already hard, or not hard, but it's already one thing to recognize our own abuse and to be open and vulnerable enough to share that and to have it heard and feel held and safe, and to let people in and let that healing happen. And it's another thing entirely for us as a human race to recognize that on a collective level, that collective grief, and the children that are still very much all over the world, millions of them, having horrific abuse, like sickening abuse. And how are we gonna meet that? How are we gonna deal with that? Thanks for listening, Jen, by the way. That was quite a lot of me sharing.
It was beautiful. It's, and that's the truth, Tara. It's like grief takes the space it needs. It comes in ways and waves which we cannot package neatly. It doesn't come packaged and polished and tied with a bow. It really doesn't. And what I feel you share is something, I really want to honor that place within me, that when I came to this planet, when I was very little, I met that place within me. I truly believe, Tara, and like you may look at me one way and think, no, that can't be you. But I truly knew that there was a place within me, and this was me tapping into the collective of what was going on. Whenever I was near a young baby or a child, my whole body went, I can't be trusted. Oh my God, I hope I never have children. In fact, there's no way I should have children, because what would I do? What might I do? There's an undercurrent that is existing, that is playing people, that is working us, because it's unspoken and it's so hidden. So it scared the shit out of me when I had my own children, that I was placed in such a position of trust with the divine that said, you've worked this edge, you've met this edge inside of you all of your life, Jen. Trust yourself, trust that mother within you, that mother goddess who is the frickin' protector. Trust her, trust her. And that same as you, like that universal child protector, but having known that, yes, in lifetimes, I know I have been that perpetrator many, 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 many times. And, the grief that I have met quite in unusual circumstances in my own body. I happened to take my children to Auckland Museum in New Zealand, and way in the top floor is the huge area dedicated to World War I, World War II. It's just, that whole thing. And I'm walking in with a buggy and the kids. And there's this enormous poster of Hitler and Mussolini. And I walked in and the energy hit me and I went down on the floor. And the grief, I couldn't get through the door. The grief that moved through me with my babies there, with my little one there, that I literally just curled up in the corner holding my babies, holding my all my babies, holding what I'd held in the concentration camps, holding what I'd held in those lifetimes, as that moved through my consciousness as I met that place within. And grief is fucking inconvenient. It doesn't fit into the nice polished pretend veneers that we have placed on who we must be, but it takes us so deep into our love and our capacity to love these places within us. And the children, they are calling us. They are calling us to show up with the widest open space to walk with our own grief in one hand and our gratitude in the other.
Grief and relief, they come together.
Yeah.
It's that you said it, it's like, that's love, is to go there. It's not love to avoid.
No.
I think people have got that really mixed up.
Yeah, yeah.
Love is going there. Love is bringing the light in the darkest places.
Yeah.
I really hear you, Jen. I really hear you. My grief hits me, my legs go from underneath me and I can't stand up. It's just collapse. There's just nothing you can do, like jelly legs.
Yeah. 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 And I want to speak into the sound of grief. You know, in our beautiful bodies, just for those who are listening and connecting with this, we still have all our beautiful tools and our awarenesses in the body of the breath. We can close the circuits by placing our hands on our body so we can feel our own container.
Mm-hmm.
We can hold ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We can let the body move so that the breath can move to meet. The breath can move and the grief can move. And it may want to move in ways it shakes, that it may want to vibrate, that it may want to dance, it may want to have movement and sound, like you said, drumming, a beat.
Howling, wailing, lying on the floor like a toddler.
Yeah.
You know, it's needed.
Oh, and letting sound move through, you know, like the most exquisite sounds that allow magnificence in are the ugliest sounds. Allowing yourself to make non-poetic sounds, non-in-tune sounds, you know, sounds that feel like they don't even come from your body. Because if you allow your body to bring through sounds you don't even recognize, you are getting there. You are starting to meet the depths.
When you
are
let go
starting
of
to
control.
meet yourself. Yeah.
Stop controlling life.
Yeah. Because while we do, we are keeping those children underground. We are keeping every single one of our own inner child, our innocent, our innocence.
Yeah. And our power, that's our power, that's our divine inner child, our true light, our true genius, our true beauty, our purity, hidden in dark cupboards, under our stairs or in our cellars. So let your inner child out. And man, do they need to scream. You know, really let them. I love you, Jen. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
We're all little kids, really, aren't we?
Yeah, like I want to speak into the land as well, like just really feeling as we're sharing this, you know, and it's like I'm really feeling the disconnect of our inner child, the innocence that has been pushed underground. That is what we are walking on top of. That is the veneer that we are stomping on. That is the grief is the disconnect from the whole planet, that we can't feel her. We can't feel Gaia.
It's because of our layers and layers and layers and layers of buried ancestors, and we thought that if we buried it, it was gone, out of sight, out of mind. It really isn't. The way back home is through the earth, is through that grief and connecting to the heart of Gaia that's communicating with us all of the time. She's calling us home.
She's calling
back to our humanity, back to our hearts, back to love, back to our bodies, our flesh, our blood, these beautiful temples that we walk around in. We need to come back home. Yeah, she's calling us. The mother knows best, right?
She does. And grief is the gateway.
I really believe that. I love that we've had this conversation. I know there's so much more to come, but at least, you know, we can talk about what's under that lid and start to give a feel and start to maybe put some place markers and some context so that people can navigate this, begin to navigate, even get curious. How do I really feel? What have I buried? And just get curious and come together and talk. You know, I would really encourage people, don't do this on your own. It's not grieving on your own. Grief is a collective. It needs to be done together. It needs a container. Because in our grief, we can hurt ourselves and we can hurt one another. Right? When we really access that, the unbearable, what we haven't been able to bear until now. The unbearable has to be bared. Right? The most vulnerable has to be exposed. We have to let those little inner children out of the cages, out of the dungeons, out of the tunnels, out of the dark cupboards inside of ourselves and in the world. And we need to be together to do that. So I would really massively encourage all of you, make a call out to your community, to your church, to your sacred women's groups, to your sacred men's groups, create circles, create communities, and just begin. Just be real. Listen for what wants to happen. Don't come in with the head. This is what should, no, with the rules. No, what wants to happen? Listen to the intuition, listen to the body, listen to the feminine within, the mother within, the protective father within that says, this needs space holding, and this is the container we will create for it. And just start. How incredible, how incredible. What an incredible vision to be able to come together as a humanity and grieve together, Jen. I'm holding that vision for all of us.
Me too. It's sacred work. It's so sacred.
And the message that gives to the children, to our own inner child, but to the children who are alive on this planet now. And the children are our future. The children are everything, everything. And to let the children have that message that, yes, we are human. Yes, we have emotions. And we need to become, you know, masters of our emotion, not controllers of our emotions. Our emotions will teach us self-mastery. And we can stop being control freaks. And actually just, you know, teach our children correctly by being that leader, you know, by being the change that we want to see in the world. Absolutely crucial that we give them space as well for them to be heard, for their grief to be heard, so that they don't grow up and become rigid with it by the time they're 40 or 50 years old and die of a heart attack because of it. You know, we want our children to be healthy. And so a healthy body is a healthy emotional body, healthy spirit. Should we come back and do another one of these? I feel like...
yeah, it feels great. It's interesting. It's just started pouring with rain here in New Zealand.
Really?
Hear it on the roof. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jenny. You hold an amazing space. You're a beautiful, wise soul, and yeah, such a gentle soul as well. How can people connect with you? Let's put your details below. So if anybody wants to connect with Jenny or connect with myself, put the details below. But I feel like we'll come back on and have more about this conversation. If you have any comments or you have any questions, please post them below and we can always come back to them, Jenny and I. And yeah, let's just open up these communities and these circles for grieving.
Yeah.
Do you have any final words, Jen?
I just feel it's the great unveiling of grief. Yeah, really, really unveiling, really lifting the lid. And the depth capacity, the depth capacity of love we have is the depth capacity of our willingness to meet ourselves in these places.
Oh. So please share this video
Mm.
with your community, and let's stand together.
Deep. Let's go deep.
Let's go deep.
Yeah. Mm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.